Across the Park podcast is proud to be sponsored by Globe Gas and Heating. For the best kitchen and bathroom renovations, boiler servicing and repair, and central and underfloor heating in the Northwest, head over to globecentralheating.com and quote Across the Park for a free quote.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Across the Park podcast. Myself, Judgy, on a bank holiday Monday. Great to be back in the studio and delighted to be joined by Joe Thomas, Everton's correspondent for the Liverpool Echo. Joe, good to have you in, mate.
Yeah, pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry, I've said to you before, I'm sorry to have dragged you out on a bank holiday Monday, but at least we're not missing any of the nice weather today. It's a bit miserable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's horrible out there.
It's crap. Before we get started, just a couple of messages on behalf of the podcast. First of all, it's that time of the year again where we pay tribute to the victims of the Hillsborough disaster. So to all the families of the victims, you're in our thoughts, you're in our hearts as always. And I think it's always nice in a weird way at this time of the year, because you see the two teams, the two halves of the city, the Reds, the Blues, come together with that common goal of paying tribute, and there was, as always, there was some really touching tributes, and I hope again with the move to the new stadium that will be that same level of respect, and also that there's a place there at the new stadium to pay respects to the 97. I know, Joe, obviously you spent a lot of your journalist career on that side of it, but yourself, do you have that same feeling? It's obviously not a happy time of the year, but it's like a nice kind of warm side to the city that comes out, isn't it?
I mean, I think it's an incredibly poignant time of the year. There's no doubt about that. It's a period for, reflection, and one for sadness really as to what happened. And I think, having covered it so deeply, I think one thing that gets lost in a lot of it, not necessarily in this city but outside, is that could have happened to anybody going to that stadium. Hillsborough's a tragedy of many tragedies, and one of them is the way in which those who have sought to kind of deflect blame elsewhere have turned it into a Liverpool tragedy. And actually, it was a national tragedy football, with family, not just football could have happened to anyone, but with families from all over the country that were affected by that. And we'll all have sad moments and poignant moments over this period. But yeah, I think it's a time of year where typically, Liverpool as a city, Merseyside as a community, tends to show its strength.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've seen the post that Everton put out, one of the groundsmen. I think it was part of a show or a production that they done where they spoke about the hill. Did you see that? Yeah,
I went down there last year when he did it. It really is a nice it's a nice feature there at Finch Farm with the kind of the meadow flowers that he has overlooking the training ground there. So yeah, it's a really nice gesture, and I think that you don't have to look far across the city to find moments like that everywhere. So.
No, you're right. For anyone who hasn't seen that, if you look at Everton's social media, there's I think it's like a 2-minute reel or a clip which talks about how the ground staff have created their own tribute to the 97. But I'll allow you to watch it because it's a lot more effective listen to it from the ground's person's perspective. Before we get into the show and football matters, I just want to touch on something which is come our way over the weekend. So unfortunately I wasn't able to attend the game at the weekend. I was on holiday, but Millsy, in his usual pre-match ritual, went down to the Wetherspoons, and he was approached by one of our listeners, one of our followers, Andy, his name is, from Preston. Hello to you, Andy. I hope you're watching. I hope you're listening. I hope you're doing well. Andy opens up with regards to struggles he's having as a result of losing his mum last year in a tragic way. And he did touch on the fact that he's having particular difficulties to the extent that he was considering taking his own life. Obviously not anything that anyone wants to hear, but I want to use that opportunity to say to Andy, to anyone, any of our listeners, any of our followers who are having similar issues, there is help out there. And maybe it starts with a conversation like Andy had with Millsy and with John from the Blue Boys Network. It might start with that if that's what gets it going. But there are plenty of formal, professional ways to get help. I've lost a couple of friends over the years to mental health. And it would break my heart to see anyone I know or anyone associated with the podcast or anyone who is out there who has not took the opportunity to speak to either friends, family, or seek professional help, I have in the description for today's podcast posted 3 or 4 charities, organisations who support young men, young women, and just people in general who are having mental health problems. But Andy, to you, I hope you're well, mate. I hope you're tuning in as always. I hope you can pluck up the courage to speak more about your troubles, and hopefully you can come out the other side. And yeah, best wishes to you, mate. And yeah, just on behalf of Across the Park podcast and the Blue Boys Network, you put out a similar message this week. Up the toffees, and hopefully see you soon, Andy, in the Wetherspoons for a drink the next home game. Anyway, Joe, into the matters on the field. Obviously, I've read your report of the game. I've listened to your brief post-match reaction, as it were, after speaking to Pep and to David Moyes. What for you do we take from the game of the weekend? Obviously, it's always disappointing to lose, albeit losing to Man City 2-0, there's certainly no shame in it. I think certainly reading your words and listening to your words, you can take some positivity from the game. Yeah,
I think so. I think that, look, it's difficult to read too much into these games. We know that although Everton were mathematically confirmed safe on Sunday with Ipswich losing to Arsenal, let's be perfectly honest, they've been safe probably for a couple of months now, haven't they? So one of the many battles that David Moyes is kind of having to fight away from, now that the relegation fear is gone, is trying to keep the season alive and make sure that the players are still playing for something, because they are for the club. Where they finish does have a significant matter, and a lot of them are playing for their careers. Or certainly their Everton futures. So, it's interesting in that respect. But I thought that they played pretty well against City. I thought for probably 70, 75 minutes that they matched them. I thought probably going into the last 15 minutes it felt like a game that was going to peter out into a bit of a tame draw, to be honest. It didn't do that. The changes had a big impact. The changes on 75. Tarkowski going off was a blow. Obviously, Everton, it's been very, very rare that Everton have had a side out on the pitch, certainly in the Premier League in the 3 years that he's been in. He's not been there. But really, I thought it was the changes on 79, 80 minutes that made a big difference. Everton made a triple substitution. City made a double substitution, and they kind of almost combined to have a double effect, really, and it just all worked against Everton.
Just on that point, Joe, because you touched on that, I think you're spot on. I was watching it thinking, just waiting for Pep to make a change, because you thought it needs something else. You've got the likes of Doku on the bench, you've got Grealish, you've got Foden, obviously an absolute abundance of talent on there. It was interesting that he waited until so late. Do you think he was almost thinking Everton are going to have to make a change here? Everton, they're going to have to disrupt their own system, and I'll wait for that. I'm not saying he made changes based on our 3 changes, but I think he was just waiting for us to tire a little bit before.
He didn't make changes based on Everton's defence because they were all getting ready at the same time. So it wasn't a reaction. Neither was a reaction to the other one, I don't think.
But do you think he knew? Do you think he knew that at 70, 75 minutes that it was going to be a point that the game might just naturally open up a little bit more?
I think probably what delayed him from doing it earlier was probably Tarkowski coming off. I think he probably wanted to have a little look. Obviously, Tarkowski comes off about 55 minutes. He probably would have wanted 10 minutes just to see whether that had a big effect on the game. And look, I think it did have a little bit. When Michael Keane came on, Everton we just kind of lost. They lost their discipline a little bit. Obviously, he hasn't played for a long time. Michael is coming. That's an incredibly difficult game to come on. I mean, those circumstances to come onto it. A centre back as well. Felt for him a little bit there. So I think he probably saw that City were getting a little bit more joy. And I think look, it's been a common theme of Everton over the last 2 or 3 years. We know that they don't have the squad depth, so that we know they're a side that, if other teams use their squads right, they should be able to hurt Everton in the last 10, 15 minutes. And I think that's precisely what they did. I think Idrissa Gueye coming off was massive. He had a little bit of cramp. Some of those changes made by Moyes, it wasn't all, some of it was tactical, but some of it was also kind of just trying to freshen legs. And as I say, Gueye had a bit of cramp, and I thought he was probably Everton's best player for most of that game. So, when you combine all that with Jeremy Doku coming on, I thought he gave O'Brien a few problems, asked a few questions of him that weren't being asked before the game, and City's class just shone through, and that's almost kind of my bigger takeaway really from the game. The fact that once again we've seen Everton we can see Everton's first 11 or 12 players can be competitive against very good sides in this league. they just don't have that squad depth to be able to maintain that through the cycles of changes that we tend to get in the last half an hour.
I think it's losing, as you pointed to there, it's losing those key personnel. And I've always thought for a long time now, best part of 10 or 15 years, that this Everton squad has lacked leaders. You know, you see it when, and that's why Seamus Coleman's probably still here now. It's why Ashley Young has been maintained to some extent. But you lose Tarkowski and you lose Gay, who are leaders, both, I think, off the ball, on the ball, more vocal than maybe some of the teammates. You take them two out, and it does look like quite a timid side, doesn't it?
The leaders on the pitch, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the difference. Obviously, we know that Coleman has a huge value off the pitch and in the dressing room. If you speak to David Moyes about Ashley Young, you know, he's been really blown away by his leadership qualities, you know, what he does in the dressing room. And another player that he often mentions when he speaks about the big personalities that are helpful Finch Farm is Asmir Begovic. But again, obviously another player who's not on the pitch. Might be there for every other bit other than the 90 minutes of the game, but he's not there on the pitch to command in the same way that someone like a Tarkowski is during a game. So I think when you lose Tarkowski's, not just his physical presence, but also I think his personality, I think you take something away from the Everton side. I think Idrissa Gueye is less kind of vocal as a leader.
It's more as it is,
but in terms of, he's more of a leader through what he does, and I think the combination of losing both of those obviously had a big effect on how that game turned out.
We're going to come on to some of the players you just mentioned there, because 3 or 4 of those names are players who we could be saying goodbye to in the summer. So we're going to do a feature specifically on those players. Just before we move past, the changes, and obviously you point to the fact that it was City's double change as much as our triple change that had the impact. Did it tell you a little bit more about, and I don't want this to be a loaded question here, did it tell you a little bit more about where Jarrad Branthwaite is in terms of his reliance on Tarkowski in that relationship? Because it's noticeable, I think, the absence of Tarkowski when he's not on the pitch to Jarrad Branthwaite, more so than Jarrad Branthwaite not being there is to Tarkowski. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does make sense. It does make sense. Not really, to be perfectly honest, because it wasn't as if City didn't put on a big man that then kind of played up against Michael Keane and Branthwaite and caused them lots of problems. It was more that I think that what you see with Jarrad Branthwaite and Michael Keane, they don't have that kind of relationship. Even Michael Keane's played quite a lot this season, but he hasn't played a lot with Jarrad Branthwaite. It was instead of Jarrad Branthwaite, wasn't it? So they just don't have that kind of that personal relationship of understanding what they're going to do. So I think that hurts. But I think Jarrad Branthwaite could operate well with someone who isn't Tarkowski. Obviously, he's played almost his entire Everton career alongside Tarkowski, but I do think that should Tarkowski be out for any length of time, the most obvious thing to do now is to move Jake O'Brien into centre back, and then we can learn a little bit more about how much Branthwaite may be dependent on the Tarkowski, how much he can go it alone, how much he can adapt to another. I think it's very difficult to read the from 15-20 minutes at the end of the game against Manchester City, especially when you had the movement around them. Obviously, Marmoush, they swallowed up Marmoush for 75 minutes, but then when you took Tarkowski off behind him and Idrissa Gueye off in front of him, all of a sudden there's all those little bits of pockets of space, and you got Doku out wide stretching the space, and then all of a sudden, I don't think you could read too much into any one player's influence in that last 20 minutes.
No, that's really fair. I guess what I'm asking is, does Jarrad Branthwaite at the moment, given his still relatively inexperienced, does he need a leader? Does he need someone who's a Tarkowski? I'm not saying him per se. Do you think in that balance we need a leader and a more, I guess?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I'd see it like that. I think what I'd be really interested to see I think Jarrad Branthwaite is a potential, depending on where his future lies, I think he's probably future Everton captain, maybe even a future England captain.
True.
So actually, what I'd be really interested to see is whether or not he got a little bit more of a, almost more of a freedom of his personality, freedom of expression, if he didn't have someone like Tarkowski alongside him. I would like to see, the one thing that we probably haven't seen of Branthwaite in an Everton shirt is what it's like when the responsibility kind of increases on him and the pressure on him from on his character rather than just his ability, because he's always had Pickford behind him, Tarkowski next to him, often Idrissa Gueye in front of him, and sometimes you've got Seamus Coleman to the right of him as
Ashley
well.
Young to the left.
Ashley Young on the left back. So one of the things that might be really interesting to see over the course of the next few weeks might be, can Jarrad Branthwaite
Can he mentor O'Brien?
Can he mentor O'Brien and things like that? I think that's a good question that's worth asking, because obviously, Tarkowski is kind of moving towards the last stages of his contract, and the last stages of his career is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but he's another person Everton are going to have a conversation about at some point, aren't they? So, seeing whether or not Jared Branthwaite can kind of step up, not just in terms of ability-wise performance on the pitch, but with his personality, that's I think is a question that is worth exploring for Everton, and I think they could get some value from knowing precisely where he is on that level, over the next few weeks.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of the other players on the pitch before we move past the City game, obviously Armando Brosier's got another start ahead of Beto. I think that's probably fair given the fact that Beto, despite the outside media, raving over his goals, he hasn't scored now for I think it's 7 or 8 games. What did you make of Armando's performance, and I guess the chances of him really extending his stay?
Yeah, it's tough. I thought he struggled really, and let's be honest, I don't think there's that much shame in struggling against that City defence. I know Josko Gvardiol typically plays on the left of defence, he was at centre back, but him and Ruben Diaz, they know what they're doing,
and they're both strong. And
exactly. So it's hard work, that is. I thought he was all right in the first half against Forest. I thought there was some nice little bits of movement and pockets of play between him and Jack Harrison in the first half at Forest. But I still thought that Everton were probably a little bit better when Beto came on for him. And I thought the same again on Saturday. I was a bit if we were looking at things solely from a results perspective right now, I'd have probably considered starting Beto, just because I think that he's a physical presence. He's a willing runner. He'll stretch those. He'll give those two centre backs something to think about, especially when you've got a situation where, say, you got Nico O'Reilly at left back for City, who really is an attacking midfielder. If there are little pockets of space there for him to try and run in behind and exploit, then I think it'll give City something different to think about. Beto's an interesting one because he's almost better against the better defences. I think if you put Ruben Diaz or Virgil van Dijk up against like an Erling Haaland type figure or someone like that, then they know what to expect because they're all world-class players on a similar wavelength. I think Beto's an agent of chaos, and that's why I think he does so well against Liverpool, because I think quite often I'm not sure he knows what he's going to do next, and just that uncertainty, it just creates panic amongst them, and I just thought that might be a more effective route. But I can kind of understand where Moyes is going, because I think that he's seen enough of Beto to have formed an opinion on him. What that opinion is, obviously, to a certain extent, we'll have to wait and see. But he's given Beto a protracted run in the side. He was forced to, really, because obviously the injuries house-wise. Beto repaid that faith. Ultimately, Everton have been safe for a long time because of the goals that Beto scored in February, and he deserves credit for that. But they would also be probably higher up the league table if he'd scored some of those chances he had against the likes of Brentford and elsewhere. So it's a fascinating one, Beto. But I think that part of the rest of the season has to be about answering questions. And one of those questions is, where is Breuer? What can he do? Everton aren't going to trigger the option to make it permanent for £30 million. But in a market this summer where there probably aren't many good forwards available, and there's a lot of competition for the ones that are, could Moyes learn enough about Breuer to think, well, maybe there's another conversation to be had with Chelsea there about getting him back on loan? Could he? Would they be willing to talk about his figure and drop it significantly, bearing in mind how this has been another injury hit season? If Breuer was to come on and take his chances, then it could spark conversations like that. But I don't think he quite has this season. I thought it was quite telling as well that the crowd chants for Beto started in advance of him coming on. I think everybody sensed it wasn't working up top and they needed to try something different on Saturday.
No, I agree. We have got some social media questions, Joe. I'm just trying to bring them in at the right point, and obviously whilst we're on the game at the weekends, I'm just going to ask you about Nathan Patterson. You mentioned that was an option. David Moyes did directly address that and say that he felt that it would be a little bit too disruptive. The question is, so it's probably extending beyond Saturday, why has it not worked out for Nathan Patterson? It's from Wayne on Twitter, was 1016. He's now on his 5th Everton manager. 4 of them plays others ahead of him. His stock is so low, a bit unfair. We would struggle to command a fee. What went wrong? Such a promising signing.
It's injuries. It's as simple as that. I think that, I think we're coming to. He hasn't finished the season fit for Everton, Nathan Patterson, in any of the ones that he's been at the Blues. So that's been a big problem. He was brought as a young player that might be able to develop into a Premier League signing, and potentially still could. But if you look at there have been runs of games where he's played and looked all right, but it's always injury that stopped him. Frank Lampard started him at right back during the season that he started with. And the start of that season, look, I mean, Everton conceded a few chances, but defence wasn't the biggest problem there. They started off with, kind of almost playing 5 at the back and ended up with 4. I think they transitioned at Leeds. And Nathan Patton handled that pretty well. If you remember that goalless derby at Goodison, he did all right in that game. Everton went toe-to-toe with Liverpool in that match and could easily have won that game. And I thought Patterson was having a good start to the season, but then he picked up a big injury. So every time he built up a bit of momentum, he just gets held back by his body. You look again, Dyche did play him a little bit, but again, he got injured, and then I think that 5-1 win at Brighton, that game started with Everton having that amazing start. They got the first goal in the first 60 seconds. I think it's Patterson that wins the ball on the halfway line for that goal. So there have been bright moments for him, but he just can never seem to get that chance to build up momentum. So that's always been the problem. That's what's held him back, I think.
Is he another player maybe between now and the end of the season, given the...
He's got to have a look at him. I think just to finish off on that point, I think probably, back end of last season, I think it was pretty clear that there was perhaps a bit of a personality clash with Sean Dyche as well. It was, Sean Dyche had 2 people that he trusted at right back in Coleman and Young, both, in terms of their ability and also in their personalities. And I think it was pretty clear that in Patterson, he had a player that he wasn't willing to put faith in. So I think he was held back by then. So like a lot of players, he's held back partly by his body, but also by, you mentioned earlier, the number of managers that he's played under. Well, imagine having to constantly trying to, every time he comes back from injury, he's got to prove himself to a new manager. And he's got to do that in a side which, let's be perfectly honest, since he's joined, has only ever been in relegation battles. So he's I almost think he's part of the collateral damage of Everton Football Club over recent years.
And I'm a fan of Nathan Patterson. I like right backs. I was a right back and a centre midfielder as a player, so I'm always particularly interested in fullbacks and how they adapt to different systems, etc. I think it's so tough when you're a young player trying to establish yourself, trying to find your own identity, trying to work out whether you're an attacking fullback, whether you're someone who's going to tuck in or whatever, and you've got a different manager with different demands. Couple that with, as you say, the injuries. It must be so tough.
Yeah, it must be. It must be really tough. Yeah, I mean, I don't think Sean Dyche quite valued. Remember when Dyche first came to Everton, I think it was Palace away that season, and drew 0-0, and Mason Holgate started at right back, and he got sent off 2 yellows on Jordan Ayew. I remember asking Dyche after that game why it was Holgate over Patterson. He said something about he wanted someone who could be, with the ability to play balls from deep, from right back. And at that point, remember they're thinking, I'm not sure how much I buy this, but eventually, obviously, he was forced to give Patterson a go, and you had things like that Brighton performance. But yeah, it just must be incredibly tough for those players in those circumstances. And just moving on, I think that Patterson is another question that needs answering over the next few weeks, really, and he's probably going to get a chance to do so. I thought he did all right at left back. At left back the other week when he started, and it'll be interesting to see now a slot will open up at right back. I think, as I say, I think the natural thing to do, the most obvious thing to do for Moyes is, if Tarkowski is absent for any other time, is to move O'Brien into the centre, and then he's got obviously Young, Coleman, and Patterson as options on the right. Well, he knows what Young and he knows what Coleman can do. They're known quantities, aren't they? They're also out of contract at the end of the season, and Patterson's a player that's staying, or could stay if they want to keep him. Makes perfect sense just to have a little look at him and see what you can do.
I agree. So, as I said before, Joe, we're going to move on to a section now where we're just going to discuss the potential outgoings. I'll start with a bit of a game.
Oh, God, right.
And it'll be a yes-no game. There's no maybe. So I'm just going to give you a player's name, and you either say yes to retain him, no to release him, or to allow him to leave. I'll start with some easy ones. Mason Holgate.
No.
Neil Maupay.
Well, no, the obligation's there. He's got whatever, so he won't be an Everton player next season.
João Virginia.
Yes, keep.
Begovic.
Yes.
Young.
No.
Coleman? Well, it's
Probably if he's willing to move into a coaching capacity.
I get that. I'll allow you. I'll allow you the maybe on that.
You need an
the mitigation.
You need the caveat. He stays. Like there is. I want him in and around that unit next season. However it is, we'll have to see. But just they need an answer to the right back. They need a long-term answer to the right back solution, whatever they do with Coleman. That's
fair enough. Decore.
Such a difficult one, but I'll go yes.
Okay. Calvert-Lewin. I'll allow, before you say yes or no, I'll give a no as maybe they take it out of the club's hands.
No, just let's stick to the one-word answers, and then maybe we can try and explain after. Go on. So Calvert-Lewin. Yes.
Jesper Lindstrom.
No.
Amanda Brozier.
No.
Jack Harrison.
No.
Interesting. Well done. Charlie Alcaraz.
Yes.
Thanks. Who have I not covered now?
Idrissa Gueye.
Idrissa Gueye was going to be last one.
He'd be a yes for me.
Okay. So, have I missed anyone? I don't think I have. Begovic, Virginia, Holgate, Morpie, Young, Coleman, Gay, Calvert-Lewin, Decore, Harrison, Brozier, Lindstrom, Alcaraz. Sounds about right.
I think so.
Okay, so we'll go into some of the some of the whys then.
I mean, there are lots of caveats to this.
Yeah, there are.
But yeah, so go on. Tell me where you want to go. And
okay,
Michael Keane was one that he didn't say.
Oh, sorry, so. I didn't mention Michael Keane. Apologies.
So it's a no.
It's a no. I thought that would be. So the two keepers then. First of all, I think they're probably the two most straightforward ones. You spoke about Begovic and.
Yeah, Begovic leader behind the scenes. He's just that defence, the goalkeeping unit. What Jordan Pickford has done for this club over recent years has been remarkable, and probably no player has done more on the pitch to be able to make sure that Everton stayed a Premier League club. Now, a big part of that has been the unit that's behind him. Now, obviously, Asmir Begovic wasn't there last season. He was there the year before, left and came back, didn't he? But Begovic is a big personality behind the scenes. So he's a safe pair of hands. Physically and literally and metaphorically, and I just think that he's increasingly moved into punditry and things like that. But he just seems like a sensible person, and I know that Moyes has valued his presence since he came back to the club. And João Virginia, I like João. I think he's done pretty well when he's come in for Jordan Pitt. It can't be easy being the number 2 to such a talented goalkeeper. But when he's had the opportunities to do so, I think he's done pretty well. If we did really well in the FA Cup games against Palace last season when he came in, and I think he's had good moments this season. I just think why disrupt the unit that's already working, and I think 2. You have 2 players there that are part of that dynamic, part of that setup. I think they're relatively popular players there at the club as well. And I can't imagine, they're also inexpensive. So in a summer way, there is, even...
You don't want stress of
when
trying to
you've
look
got
for a number
so
2.
much to do about, when you've got so much to do, why mess with something that's working?
They're the tap-ins, aren't they?
Good way to describe them. They're tap-ins. I'm keeping it, as long as they want to stay. And I think I'm not sure about Begovic. Virginia would like to stay. He'd like more opportunities to play, but he likes Everton Football Club and knows that he's valued there behind the scenes. So I'd definitely keep them both.
Thank you. I'll bypass the ones that I think are pretty obvious. Dominic Calvert-Lewin then.
It's so tough. It really is tough with Calvert. If I'm honest, I think that we're probably in a situation where a fresh start probably works best for everybody. I think that he's done well for Everton over the years. When you look at where he came from, what he's done, you look at some of the big moments. I know he's had a lot of injury issues over recent years, but when you look back at some of the highlights, is obviously a difficult word to describe for a period of time that's been so difficult for Everton Football Club. But some of them best moments, you see. The goal he scored against Liverpool in a derby, the goal he scored against Crystal Palace. He's normally there. And, I think he gets unfairly criticised quite a lot because I think that, normally when there's a challenge to be there, he steps up for it. I think about the bravery, of scoring penalties in big moments that really mattered. He scored at Leicester City from the spot in that massive relegation battle. 12 months ago when Everton were really, really struggling, still on that mad winless run. They went to Newcastle and they got away with one, to be honest, but they got away with one because they got that penalty right in the last minute and Calvert-Lewin stepped up and put it in the back of the net. So I think he's somebody that when he gets the chance, when his body allows him the chance, he delivers. The question now, really, over for anything is his body. Now, I kind of, as I say, almost contradict myself here, because I wonder if, I think in the right, if he can find the right club, and I think if Everton can find the right alternative, I think a partner of ways might just suit everybody. And just give both the chance to move, shake hands, say, yeah, fair play, we've had some really good moments over recent years. Now's the time for us both to move on, see what else we can achieve. The only thing that would hold me back with the main thing that would hold me back with Calvert-Lewin, there is a player there. There's a player there that I don't think Everton can necessarily afford to, if they were to buy him independently. If they were to go out in the market and
we've seen it.
We've seen it time and time again, and I think it's a shame that he got injured when he did, because look, he's played a lot of games this season. He hasn't scored many goals. I do think that the tactics and the style of Deitch was really held him back. Really held him back. And I'm not saying that's not with good reason. Deitch had to do what he did for for different reasons and things like that. But this season, I thought it was particularly difficult for him. I just think that when you look at Everton trying to rebuild this summer, if you want to intersperse that squad with real quality, you've probably got to go and spend 35 million pounds for a player that you think can do what Calvert-Lewin can do. Whereas if you can kind of have a little conversation with him and get a new deal, and you've got to be confident that he's going to be fit, and that's where the big problem lies. But if you can get him fit and you can play to him, then all of a sudden that's a big signing that perhaps Everton don't necessarily need to make.
I agree.
And it's another, as I say, in a really busy summer where there are so many things that need sorting out, it's another thing that you don't. But really, it's got to come down to his body. I think that's what it's got to be. And we're only privy to so much information on that. But he hasn't played a lot of games over recent years. Everton do have to be ruthless. So it's a really tough one.
Does he want it though? Does he want to stay?
I think I think that there have been times, where he's been more than willing to listen to offers from elsewhere. I think that he probably understands right now that the situation at Everton is becoming a very different to the one that he's been in for a long time. It's an improving situation. I think he's seen the way in which Moyes sets about his teams, or this team. I think we already saw in the early days of Moyes that there would probably be more chances created for Calvert-Lewin. He obviously got that goal to end his drought against Spurs, and it was a nice little goal that was. But had he had a little bit more confidence behind him, probably should and probably would have scored that late chance against Aston Villa. So I think he can see a pathway to a better future. And obviously, there is the opportunity there to be the main man at a club that's about to enter a new stadium, and this isn't going to be a false dawn for Everton. So there is something to be part of there for him. You add on to that the injuries that he's had. Well, it's undoubtedly going to have hampered some of the interest in him. As he was looking to come towards the end of his contract. I think the striker market's going to be a really interesting one this year, and Calvert-Lewin is a player that a lot of people are probably going to be having the same conversation that we've just been having there about. If you can get him fit for fit for 65% of the season, you're probably picking up a player on a free there. You'd have to spend a lot of money to replicate elsewhere. So if you're someone like a Newcastle that's looking for that needs a backup striker that's got a bit of quality, if you're this is a bit of a left field shout. I don't really know why Arsenal have never really gone in for him. Just because, not because I think he'd be starting there or anything like that, but I think that he's a player that for someone like, if you're an Arsenal, this might be Newcastle next season as opposed to this season, when obviously they were in talks with him last summer, but they couldn't offer Champions League football. He's a player there, which if he's not your main man, then you can work a lot better, more effectively to keep him fit and to protect his body. And I think if you're someone like an Arsenal, and like you look at the situation at the minute where they're playing Marino up front because of the injuries that they've got, someone like a Calvert-Lewin's a relatively inexpensive player that's Premier League proven. You can use him to rest your main man for the games against your Southamptons and other teams. You can use him to rotate for cups and things like that. You can keep him fresh. He can allow you to keep others fresh. But also for someone like Arteta, he offers a plan B. Arteta doesn't have a plan B and hasn't had one for a while. And you just think against them stubborn sides, just put a battering ram. But But yeah, it's a really interesting one. I think, if you could find the right terms, then I'd be willing to kind of have a conversation with him about staying. But part of it has got to be an acceptance, really, that his body's held him back over recent years, and that's got to have an impact on his contract.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot.
There has to be a compromise from both sides for it to be
I
worth
agree.
it.
And as you alluded to there, I think a lot depends on the interest from other clubs. If there's a lack of that, or maybe a lack of willingness to give him what he perceives to be the right type of contract, then that might open the door for more of a compromise then.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting one, and that was probably the one that's going to be the most tricky. But the other couple that you're under about, Abdoulaye Doucouré.
Yeah, again, obviously Everton haven't triggered the extension, but that would have been an extension on the same terms he's currently on. He's obviously a very well paid player. And I think that he's a player that deserves his flowers, because it talk about Pickford and what he's done to keep Everton in the Premier League. Look, Abdoulaye Doucouré's done a lot. He scored many big goals.
Incredibly important goals, yeah.
But this time, was it 2 years? Well, was it 2 or 3 years ago? God knows how long it feels meshed into one.
Yeah.
But in the season, it ended with a Bournemouth goal. Everton in that situation, if he's not there popping up with goals in the draws at Forest, the draws at Chelsea, and you start the next season, he gets the first goal at Brentford in the first win of the season, and some good goals, and then he scores against Chelsea. And even this season now, he struggled in the first half of the year, but under Moyes, he's popped up with a few big moments as well. The Nottingham Forest goal against Man United, fastest goal against Leicester. It's not always pretty, and he's not always convincing in how he does it, but he is someone that keeps coming up with big moments. So again, I kind of think what Everton need to do, one of the things that Everton need to do over the course of this summer is they need to create a squad. They haven't had a squad for years. And I think a lot of the conversations with some of the players has got to be, are you willing to be a squad player next season? Is Doucouré willing to take a bit of a pay cut and play less, but then you've got him?
Yeah.
Is Idrissa Gueye willing to do the same? Is Dominic Calvert-Lewin willing to do the same? And if a lot of these players are there and they're willing to buy into and commit to the Everton project, so they can see what the club can offer them, but accept that the club also has to kind of move on in some of those positions and try and find alternatives that might be first choice in those positions, then I think there's a place for them, because I think you can have too much change. They're already going to have to change in venues. Now, it's going to have a big psychological impact. It's going to be exciting moving to the waterfront, but it is also going to be a challenge as well.
It's going to be daunting as well. Of course it is. If you've got a young
squad. It's going to be changing the squad, of course it is. It's been changing the boardroom. It's been changing the dugout. There is... for all that it's been a really difficult last few years at Everton, you in the bid to try and move on from that, you can try and do too much too quickly. And with players like Doucouré, with players like maybe Calvert-Lewin and Idrissa Gueye, I do think that has to come into contact, so to be taken into the consideration.
So again, I guess
but Doucouré,
compromise again, but this financial compromise more so with Doucouré.
Yeah, that's it. If he's willing to, then yeah. Look, I think a sign of Everton's progress would be being able to move away from Doucouré in a number 10 role, or that kind of support striker role. Really, they need someone that can kind of link up midfield and attack more coherently. Someone that can do more on the ball, probably got a better first touch, better range of passing than Doucouré has. I like Charlie Alcaraz, and I think maybe he could be a player that does something similar. But I can understand if Moyes was to go out and try and find someone different. But I think a real sign of Everton progressing from a bottom third of the table side to a genuine mid-table side would be solving that problem and having a more, as I say, cohesive attacking unit, which includes some of that midfield element.
And a bit of variety.
But you can't deny that Doucouré keeps popping up. He's effective and he keeps popping up in big moments. And I think he is someone that can still have value to Everton Football Club going forward.
Spot on. You mentioned Alcaraz was the other one there, so you would...
Yeah, I again, Alcaraz is someone that I think we've seen glimpses of him, and I think he looks good. You haven't had the obligation. There's an obligation to make the deal permanent if he starts 9 league games. Well, he started 4 and there's only 5 left, so it was quite a big omission from Moyes the other day. It now means that if they wanted to trigger it that way, then he'd have to start every game going now. Obviously, there are other conversations that can be had. I think Flamingo are willing to sell him, and Everton might want to try and get the price down further and things like that. So, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that if he wasn't to start at Stamford Bridge, that would necessarily mean that there isn't a deal that's going to be pursued. But I think Alcaraz represents too much value for money to turn down. I
agree, yeah.
I don't know if he's going to turn into the world beater that we'd love him to be. I don't know if he's going to become a game changer at this level, but in that effort to build a squad that can be effective, he's versatile. Yeah. We've seen that he can influence Premier League games. He's brilliant at Palace. He played in a deeper role in that game, set up Beto for the first goal, scored the second. Fantastic in that game he was, and we've seen glimpses of it where I think he's also a type of player that I think he can buy into whatever. And there's just something about him, and I think the fans realise this already. There's a bit of a street dog about him. A bit of a play. He's a scrapper. You get the sense that he's crisscrossed the world trying to find a new home, or trying to find a footballing home. He's only 22. He's had so many moves already. You just feel like if someone was to show him a little bit of love, that they would get repaid in that. And I think that for the roughly £12 million, it would be. I think at that price.
Again, you're looking around thinking, what else are we getting for 12?
Exactly. That. Yeah, I think that's a good way
of try before you buy.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't really see a downside there. Look, if it was 25 million, then I think we'd have to kind of take a deep breath and properly game it out. But at 12, I think it's worth giving him a go.
I agree. I think the rest of them you've come to pretty explicit conclusion on. Jack Harrison, you did a little bit on.
Yeah, I just wonder with Harrison whether or not, because he has got better. When Moyes came in, his confidence was on the floor. Like, he was shocked at how low it was. And it was almost a bit of a surprise, because he's a player that's done well and been afforded a lot of trust under Sean Dyche as well. So for him to reach that level under a manager that clearly valued him, is an interesting one from behind the scenes. Moyes liked both Harrison and Lindstrom before he came to Everton. He's looked at both previously in different roles. So there is a kind of almost like a historic. There's a history there for Moyes in his interpretation of these players. I think Jack Harrison works hard. I don't think he's done enough. Everton need right wingers for a start. Yeah. They need right wingers. They need pace. They need pace, need goals, need goal, and he's not providing any of that on the right. I do think his better positions on the left.
I do, yeah.
And I think we've probably seen that with some of his performances under Moyes. I think it's probably going to end up in a situation where it feels like the left is probably in Dye's spot. I'd like to see Dye in the middle. I think he could do a really good job in the middle. But you look at the season that he's had and the conditions that he's had, and he's had a great season on the left. And you got Dwight McNeil, who I think probably is left, and that's probably about it, really. I don't
he's a lot
think,
more limited than people
think. I don't think he's a number 10. I don't think that experiment worked in the first half of the season. And obviously people like the idea of him coming off the right and cutting on his left, but he's
just
so
compromising a position just to accommodate him.
That's it. So with Harrison, if all of a sudden you're looking at a situation where at best he's probably third choice on both flanks, and that isn't one.
The wages again.
Obviously, if Leeds were to come up, the option for a free loan wouldn't be there. You would suspect that they having not had him for 2 years. I think they've moved on from him. There are clubs in the MLS and places like that interested. If there was a really cheap deal to be done, again, is he someone in your squad that you have?
Player,
but I think Everton probably need to move on from Harrison.
Yeah, I agree, to be fair. A couple of social media questions that cover some of the things you've already mentioned. One that's a little bit left field, so I'll bring this one up. It's from Peter on Twitter. Do we have to sell to buy this summer? Obviously, we link to the conversations we just had then. If so, is it inevitable that Branthwaite leaves?
It's not inevitable that Branthwaite leaves. Not at all. Everton want to keep him if they can. If they want to keep him. Moyes, since he's come in, has seen that Everton's biggest strength is that triangle between Pickford, Tarkowski and Branthwaite. And they want to protect that as much as they can. They see that as the foundation. They see that as the best foundation to build the new side, the new era on.
It's as good as anything in the Premier League, let's be honest.
Probably is, yeah. Well, you look at the amount of clean sheets they've kept. So Everton would like to keep him, and Moyes would like to keep him. Obviously, there are other factors at play, and also there's the fact that you have Jacob Bryan there. So we'll probably see this over the coming weeks, but it may be that there is someone that can step in if he was to go. I don't think it's inevitable though. Everton from the summer, the PSR situation is again, it's almost contradictory. Like there are two summers for Everton. The first is, we know the Premier League operates in the football financial year operates at the end of June, beginning of July. Well, Everton have got a bit of work to do, I think, before to comply with PSR this year. I don't think anybody is fearful of where they are, but whilst we know that they complied last year, they had very little wriggle room, and we know that it got very tight because they did deals for Ben Godfrey and Lewis Dobbin right at the end of June for a reason. So obviously PSR is a 3-year rolling cycle, 105 million is your limit, 65 million of that is lost in 3 years ago. We know that they must have lost less than 40 from a PSR perspective last season because they haven't been charged this season, but they would have dug into that, so they can't afford many losses for this year. So there might be a little bit of work to do on that because we're still in a financial year that started with the ownership of Farhad Moshiri and everything that came with it. And last summer was a very difficult place, in the first few months of this season were a very difficult place for Everton Football Club. Behind the scenes, we have seen a few more kind of commercial deals come online ahead of the new stadium coming. And of course, we also saw the sale of Amadou Onana for 50 odd million pounds, which would have helped. So I think that Everton, they're still approaching the end of this financial year with a bit of caution. There is an awareness that there might be a little bit of work to do, and how they do it is going to be an interesting one. I think on the one hand, Jared Branthwaite would probably be a sledgehammer to crack a nut. If they are in a similar situation last year where they perhaps need 10 million maybe to bring in to get over the line, well, if they go and sell a player for 50-60 million, that obviously. But I do think that with Branthwaite, they'll have to be pragmatic. If a club comes in, and there are clubs looking at him with a serious bid, one, it might help them PSR this before the end of this football financial year, but going forward, it just brings a lot of money into the club, and it opens up so much more PSR headroom going into your rebuild and things like that. So I don't think they need to sell Branthwaite. I don't think they want to sell Branthwaite. I do think that part of having sensible owners is sometimes knowing that if someone comes in with a bid that's too good to turn down, then sometimes you might just have to accept it. Branthwaite's going to be an interesting one as well because obviously he'll know there's been interest in him. He had that setback with the England squad at the start of the year. I think it was unfortunate. The idea that Thomas Tuchel seems to think that because he's playing for Everton, he might not be as competitive. I think that Branthwaite can kind of ignore that slightly. Obviously, Pickford's already the England number one, so it's not a decision for Tuchel, but Pickford's done fine there for Guay's done fine there for Crystal Palace. Though Dan Burn, Newcastle having a good season, but he hasn't been playing in Europe all season. So I think if Branthwaite sticks with it, there's an England future for him there at Everton. But you can understand why if Champions League clubs come looking at him, he might look at it and go, that's a challenge that he would like as well. So it's going to be interesting. I think it'll come. It's who comes in and how much they offer and when. Yeah. But I mean, it's a very, very long-winded way of saying that I don't think Everton want to sell him, and I don't think they need to sell him. But that doesn't mean to say that there might not be a deal that gets offered which offers value for everyone. One thing that I do think that needs to be looked at this summer is if Everton do want to keep him, they probably need to offer him a new contract. I think Man United obviously came in last summer. They made it. They went about it really haphazardly and made it very easy for Everton, even in that financial situation, to say no to the offers that were coming in for him. But although Branthwaite is on, Everton hold the cards technically because he's under contract till 2027. When they signed him on a new deal at the early stages of last season, it was very much as a young player who's just broken into the first team. Now he's a player that they turned down £50 million for. If they were going to plan to do the same again this summer, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, we haven't sold you for 65 million because we think you were 75 million, but then pay you like a 12 million pound player. So, something's got to happen there.
There's no way that his agent's going to allow that to happen. I've got a funny feeling about that.
But yeah, I mean, I think that we would all love to see Jared Branthwaite there, helping lead Everton out at that stadium next season. There's a big future there for him to be part of at Everton Football Club, and I think the Everton Football Club want him to be there. But he's also a supremely talented player, and when you look around the leagues, there are probably a few sides that wouldn't mind a left-sided centre-back, and if they would come in for him, I think they'd have to pay for him, but it doesn't mean to say the answer will automatically be no if it meets Everton's valuation.
Yeah, it's a big, a massive, I think.
It's a really long answer.
No, it's well, yeah.
Can I just finish over the second part? From July the 1st, regardless of whether they've sold Branthwaite or anyone else, so long as they've got over the PSR thing, Everton's summer spend, the opportunity to spend opens up for Everton. Mentioned earlier, it's a 3-year rolling cycle, and in the last remaining year of this one, it's 22-23 when they lost about £65 million from PSR perspective.
Yeah.
Well, that all goes. The next cycle that starts on July the 1st is the first one without that millstone. Yeah. So all of a sudden, not only are Everton in a position where they have owners that have the resources to spend money, they'll be in a position where they have the regulatory headroom to not necessarily be stupid. They have to play the game, and that's where something like an offer for Branthwaite might come in because of what you can and can't do. But
at least be on an even playing field with the rest, the majority of the.
Well, there will be opportunities to spend money for Everton this summer. It's just how they do it and whether they choose to, bearing in mind what targets are available.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. We will briefly just move on to the Chelsea game before we pick up a couple of the other questions. I'm just trying to pick up my threads here. Sorry, Joe. Not as polished as Mills here doing this. So yeah, into Chelsea. Obviously next week, as you said, I think it's an interesting opportunity for David Moyes to rotate. So not rotate the players, but to bring players in that maybe haven't had minutes and maybe give them a little bit more food for thought ahead of those key decisions in the summer. Which changes do you see him making?
Well, I think he's probably going to have to make one at centre-back, and I think it makes sense for that to be O'Brien at centre-back and Patterson at right-back, just to have a look at them. Yeah. I think with Seamus, obviously we don't quite know where his future is going to lie, but and whilst he's been in matchday squads recently, it's clear that when he has played, quite often it's led to injuries. I would very much like, and I imagine that I think they should do everything they could to ensure that Coleman
he can play
in at least one of the two last Goodison games. So I don't think there's a need to do that. Patterson and O'Brien at centre back and Patterson at right back are kind of options that need to be explored by Moyes. It makes sense to do so there. It was interesting that Patterson picked up his bad hamstring injury in stoppage time at Stamford Bridge about 12 months ago. Bad memories there for him. So, but I'd start Patterson, I'd start O'Brien at centre back, and then elsewhere in the squad, I do think it's worth having a look at Alcaraz from the start. So if it was me, and obviously it's not me, I'd have a little look at maybe having him in for Decore.
I was going to say as the 10, he has played him either side, and he's not.
Or you can have the option of dropping Decore deeper and taking out Garner. But that's it. And then, obviously Breuer can't play because he's on loan from Chelsea. So I'd probably start Beto, but I'd want to see Yusuf Chermiti get some minutes because, again, he's another player that falls into that kind of exploration category of O'Brien and Patterson, where it's like this is a rare pressure-free chance to try and work out what he can bring to the side. So, he
probably is one of them players, admittedly, if Moyes doesn't fancy him, where you go, okay, well, let's say 8 million and let's just fill that gap. Quite possibly. I think we've seen glimpses of him that suggest that there's a good player in there. It's just whether or not he'll ever get the opportunity to realise it at Everton. And again, he's another one. His body's held him back. So I think I saw a lot of people questioning the decision to leave him out the squad the other day, and I can understand that because obviously you do have Coleman, Young, and Patterson all there, all for even potential right backs. And I do think that it's important to have a look at Chermiti, but I do think it's important also that we don't get too carried away by him as well, because he hasn't had that much experience of senior football across the 2 seasons that he has had. He hasn't scored a goal for Everton. He's still very much a young player who's developing and would need time to settle in. I don't think he's an immediate answer to Everton's striker problem. I think the conversations that need to be had at Finch Farm this summer are, is there a role for him? Can you have him as a third choice striker next season, or do you try and find a loan for him so he can get a full season of senior football under his belt? And then you can make a decision. No, it's a fair point. I always ask for a prediction, so I'm gonna put that here. Obviously, it's a game with Chelsea will be very keen to win. They've got a good win.
Yeah,
they're actually
win,
a really good run of form, Chelsea.
Yeah, they will have Conference League the following week, won't they, to think about. But they are, unlike Man United and Spurs, teams whose European qualification can also lie in the league, aren't they? So, it'll be a challenging one. And Cole Palmer tore Everton to shreds there last season, and it was terrible. So, but this is a different Everton side. I'm going to go one each.
I agree. Yeah. I agree. One each. Okay, so we're coming to the end now, Joe. Just a few more social media questions, if you don't mind. Again, really appreciate your time. First one is from Carl. Does Joe know any news of when the new Everton Stadium will be named/sponsored? Surely we need the revenue ASAP, and we need a big recruitment drive this summer. We've spoke about the recruitment. Any news on the naming rights?
Yeah, I mean,
obviously,
obviously, like
any speculation.
Are working hard on it. I think it's something that they want to make sure they get right rather than get done quickly. Obviously, any revenue would be welcome, but it's in terms of sparking a summer recruitment drive, I don't think it's a necessity for that. You would think that anybody that's willing to spend a significant amount of money on a naming rights deal would want to be there when the stadium opens. Of course. You would think that there is a value to that. When obviously the eyes of the world comes to Everton at the start of next season. I guess the only thing that might counter that is that whoever is the first, whenever they come, and I think this is kind of approach Spurs have taken, whoever becomes the first will still have, the Echo Arena is still the Echo Arena, and even though it's M&S Bank, obviously I'm a little bit biased in that.
You're right.
So
it takes a long time to shake a stadium name.
So whenever it comes online, it'll happen. But they're working away at it. I know that. So.
Fair enough. Conversely, this is from Jack. What's Joe's opinion on the lack of events and publicity the club have done around Goodison this last season? Apart from the odd social media blast, there's been nothing. No events, no Legends game, nothing. Feels like so much more could have happened this season.
I think that's a little bit unfair,
I do,
to be honest. I think we have to remember there are reasons that Goodison's being left, and part of that is from an infrastructure point of view, it is crumbling. There's only so much you can do there. I think that what the club have focused on this year is less about kind of star-studded big events and more about trying to make it as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. So, what you have seen is opportunities to go down to Goodison Park to watch the under-18s play, to watch the women's side play. Like everybody that's probably in this Everton bubble right now, I'm being inundated with people saying I've never been to Goodison or I want one last chance to go to Goodison. Can you get me a ticket for? The answer's obviously no.
Going out the 1878 out and you can go and stand in Goodison
the answer is that it's very, very difficult now. But I mean, for anybody that had the foresight to know this was coming, because everybody's known it's coming. Well, there have been opportunities to pay a five and go and watch Everton. Go and watch Everton at Goodison Park, or an Everton side at Goodison Park over the course of this season. I know that their events team have worked really hard on things like the tours. They put on so many tours and they're selling out. They've had Legends tours to go around the stadium with the Legends. We've had the Goodison sleep outs and things like those charity events as well. So actually, I think the only thing that I think the club perhaps got a little bit wrong was, you remember early on in the season, they're supposed to be that essentially like a Legends night in the Gladys, wasn't there, where they were going to get some ex-players and speak to them and things like that. And I think perhaps maybe the sell and the pricing around that didn't quite match up, and obviously it ended up being put off as a result. But I actually think that you might have had to work harder than some people might have realised this, but I think there's been a huge emphasis on trying to make Goodison accessible in the last year. And I think for people that have genuinely wanted to do that, there have been lots of really, really good options to have an opportunity to have a special moment at Goodison this season. So
I agree, to be honest, Joe. I've been fortunate enough, like yourself, not as much as you, but to spend a lot of time at Goodison for different reasons. I think the club in particular this season have been a lot more open to suggestions, a lot more accessible. As I say, I referred to the 1878 and how much access they've gave them this season above all else in both stands, and I've been along to help them on a few occasions, and the club have tried their best. Yeah. And it's tough, that you've always got as you just said then, the conflict between accessibility and security and what they can feasibly do at the club, again from a logistics point of view. So I agree with you. But that's about all we've got time for. Again, Joe, really appreciate your time, mate. The insight's fantastic, and don't apologise for any of the long-winded answers, because they're the ones they enjoy, and at least you're talking a bit more sense than me. But thanks everyone for joining us. As always, you'll probably be watching this on a Tuesday after the Bank Holiday Monday. Hopefully your first day in work, or back in work, has been made a little bit easier by us. Enjoy the rest of your week, and as always, up the toffees.